On the night of March 13th, 1997, something unusual lit up the skies over Arizona. Dozens of mysterious lights appeared in formation over the city of Phoenix, moving silently and in coordination. The phenomenon was witnessed by thousands of people, including pilots, police officers, and even politicians. Reports described gigantic objects hovering in the air without making any sound, defying conventional explanations. Authorities quickly provided an official explanation, but it didn't convince everyone. If it was just a military exercise, why did so many witnesses claim that it looked like nothing they had ever seen before? Could it be possible that something much bigger was being concealed? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I am Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference in helping YouTube deliver the videos to more people and allowing me to continue bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get into the video. Imagine looking up at the sky and seeing something that shouldn't be there. Something immense, silent, impossible to ignore. On the night of March 13th, 1997, thousands of people in Arizona experienced exactly that. At first, it was just a distant glow on the horizon, but as time passed, it grew, taking shape. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a helicopter. It was something different, something that seemed to defy the known laws of physics. And the question that has never been answered since then is simple. What really happened that night? The first report surfaced around 7:55 p.m. In Henderson, Nevada. A man called the authorities saying that a set of bright lights, arranged in a V-shape, was crossing the sky. He described the object as colossal, silent, and unlike any aircraft he had ever seen. Shortly after, similar reports began to emerge from Arizona. Coincidence? Or was something moving in a calculated manner, following a specific route? By 8:30 p.m., the lights were already visible in Prescott and nearby towns. Several witnesses claimed that the object was so large that it obscured part of the starry sky as it moved. A former commercial pilot, accustomed to identifying all types of aircraft, was baffled by what he saw. There were no wings, no engines, no sound, or any sign of propulsion. Just a massive structure gliding through the sky as if defying gravity itself. If it was a military experiment, what kind of technology could allow something like that? Then, Phoenix became the epicenter of the phenomenon. Thousands of people took to the streets to observe the strange luminous formation. Drivers stopped their cars, neighbors called each other, cameras started recording. It was impossible to ignore. Some witnesses described the eerie feeling of being watched, as if that thing was aware of their presence. But why would something so large and so visible simply pass over a major city without any attempt to conceal itself? At Luke Air Force Base, the military began receiving a flood of calls. Air traffic controllers checked their radars, but nothing was registered. How could something that massive be there without leaving any electronic traces? That wasn't the only inconsistency. No known aircraft flies without making a sound, especially not one of that size. If it was a secret project, why would it be tested so openly over populated areas? If it wasn't ours, whose was it? By 10 p.m., the phenomenon took on a new form. Now, the lights were arranged in an almost perfect line and remained completely still in the sky. Several cameras recorded the scene, and the videos from that night became some of the most famous in modern ufology. What's intriguing is that, minutes later, the lights began to fade one by one, as if disappearing into nothing. And then silence. The night passed, the phenomenon had vanished, and all that remained were questions. But by the next morning, it was impossible to ignore. Newspapers, radio stations, and television networks began reporting on the previous night's events. Experts tried to find a logical explanation, but they all failed to answer the essential question. How could something so gigantic fly over an entire state without anyone knowing where it came from or where it went? The government remained silent for the first few days, but as pressure mounted, an official response emerged. The explanation? Military flares dropped by planes during a nighttime training exercise. But does that make sense? How could a simple set of flares be described by so many witnesses as a solid, silent object with intelligent movements? Could this have been a convenient excuse to cover up something much bigger? The mystery of the Phoenix lights was only just beginning. But one thing was certain: what was seen that night would not be forgotten anytime soon. One thing was certain: what happened that night was not an isolated incident witnessed by just a small group of people. There were thousands of witnesses spread across multiple cities, all describing the same thing. How could an event with such widespread exposure be ignored? How could it all be reduced to a simplistic explanation when the reports pointed to something much greater? The first to notice the phenomenon were residents of rural areas, where light pollution doesn't interfere with sky observation. In Prescott, a retired police officer, experienced in identifying aircraft from his time in service, reported seeing a massive boomerang-shaped object gliding across the sky without making any sound. The structure appeared solid because, as it passed, it obscured the stars behind it. Another couple, driving on a deserted highway in the region, was so struck by the sight that they pulled over and got out to take a better look. The man claimed it was big enough to cover an entire stadium. But what could be that large and still move with such precision? As the object approached Phoenix, the reports increased. A group of friends, gathered for a backyard barbecue, noticed the lights approaching and rushed to grab a camcorder. What they recorded would later become one of the most debated pieces of evidence about the case. In their footage, the lights maintained a flawless formation, without any sudden changes in position, as if they were attached to something invisible. But if it was just a formation of military aircraft, why was there no sound of engines? Another intriguing testimony came from a civilian pilot flying over the region that night. In his report, he stated that he tried to establish radio contact to check if any military aircraft were in the area, but he received no response. To make matters worse, his instrument panel briefly malfunctioned while flying over the zone where the lights had been seen. Was this just a coincidence, or was something interfering with electronic systems? Phoenix was where the event reached its peak. When the lights hovered over the city's buildings, hundreds of calls flooded local police. The descriptions were eerily similar: an immense, silent structure with bright lights and slow movement, as if analyzing the city below. Many reported an eerie sense of unease, a feeling that something was watching Earth. But was this just the psychological impact of witnessing something inexplicable? Or was there truly an intelligence behind this phenomenon? What makes this case even more astonishing is that even public officials witnessed the event. Then Arizona Governor Symington initially mocked the case, holding a press conference where one of his aides appeared dressed as an alien. The goal was to calm the public and divert media attention. But years later, Symington completely changed his stance. In a public interview, he admitted that he had also seen the object that night, and that it was indeed something that defied any conventional explanation. If the state's own governor couldn't find a rational justification for what he saw, how could anyone believe it was just a military exercise? And more importantly, why would someone in a position of power feel the need to hide the truth? As time passed, many residents never forgot what they had witnessed that night. Some began searching for answers, interviewing other witnesses, and organizing meetings to discuss the event. A former military officer from Luke Air Force Base, who chose to remain anonymous, revealed that on that very night, 2 F-15 fighter jets were deployed to intercept an unidentified object over Phoenix. But what happened after this supposed interception? No official records exist. No reports. No explanations. Just silence. The big question is, if it was just a set of flares, as authorities claimed, why mobilize fighter jets to chase lights in the sky? If it was a military exercise, wouldn't the pilots have been informed beforehand? Something here doesn't add up. The demand for answers grew in the years that followed. Ufologists, journalists, and even scientists attempted to reconstruct the case based on witness testimonies. Many of the descriptions were identical, indicating that people had truly seen something tangible, physical. And it wasn't just ordinary citizens. Pilots, police officers, former military personnel, and even aviation experts confirmed that what passed over Arizona's skies that night did not fit any conventional technology. So the question remains, was this one of the greatest cover-ups in modern history? What did all these people really see? And why, even after so many years, does this case remain unexplained? The official response came too late. For months, the government ignored questions about the Phoenix lights, and when it finally decided to speak, the explanation was disappointing. According to the Air Force, what thousands of people saw that night was nothing more than military flares dropped by A-10 Warthog aircraft during a training exercise at Luke Air Force Base. But does this version really make sense? Flares are common devices used in military operations, but they have very distinct characteristics. They descend slowly while burning, attached to parachutes, and flicker or oscillate as they fall. Additionally, they usually leave trails of smoke, visible even at night. No witnesses reported any such behavior. On the contrary, the lights moved in a controlled manner and remained in the sky much longer than expected for simple flares. How could the Air Force mistake such a massive event for something so trivial? Another suspicious detail: the airspace where the supposed flares were dropped was over the Estrella Mountains, south of Phoenix. But reports and recordings show that the lights were over the city, not miles away in a restricted military area. Was this a gross miscalculation, or simply a convenient way to divert attention from the real event? The inconsistency of the official explanation becomes even more apparent when analyzing the timeline of events. The most famous videos of the case do show static lights in the sky, and these may have indeed been part of a military exercise. But what about the moving lights? And the gigantic object that witnesses described blocking out the stars? This detail was completely ignored by the military. The media helped reinforce the official explanation. Major news outlets treated the event as a misunderstanding, mocking witnesses and dismissing their versions of the facts. Some reports even suggested that people had been confused due to mass hysteria. But if that were the case, why did trained pilots, police officers, and even the state governor see the same thing and disagree with the military's explanation? Former Governor Symington is one of the key figures in this controversy. As mentioned earlier, he made fun of the case at the time, organizing a press conference where one of his aides appeared dressed as an alien. But years later, he admitted that he had lied to prevent panic. In interviews, he revealed that he himself saw the structure in the sky and that it was nothing that could be explained as flares or conventional aircraft. If a former governor, with access to privileged information, didn't believe the military's version, why should the public? And what about the supposed deployment of F-15 fighter jets to intercept the object? Witnesses near Luke Air Force Base reported that 2 jets were launched that night, flying at high speed toward the area where the lights had been seen. A former military officer who worked at the base, speaking anonymously, stated that something unusual happened that night, something that could not be explained as a simple exercise. Yet, to this day, there is no official record of this operation. If nothing unusual was in the sky, why were fighter jets mobilized? There's another factor that casts doubt on the official version. If the Phoenix lights were just flares, why have similar events been reported in other parts of the world? On multiple occasions, V-shaped or boomerang-shaped luminous formations have been observed in different countries, with reports strikingly similar to those from Arizona. Could it all be a coincidence? Or are we dealing with a pattern that authorities prefer not to acknowledge? The strangest part is that, despite the military's explanation, the armed forces never presented any images or records of the alleged training exercise from that night. No official video of A-10s dropping the flares was released, nor was there any detailed report proving that this was the origin of the lights. With all the technology available, wouldn't it be easy to provide concrete evidence instead of just words? What really happened on March 13, 1997? Was the government's version an attempt to calm the public or a smokescreen to conceal something much bigger? If the object seen that night wasn't ours, then whose was it? If the Phoenix lights were not just flares, as the government claimed, then what was the real explanation? Some researchers believe that the event could be related to secret military technologies, possibly belonging to the United States or even another global power. But if it was just an experiment, why test something like that in civilian airspace, in front of thousands of witnesses? One of the most discussed theories suggests that the object seen that night could have been an experimental aircraft based on stealth technology, something beyond anything officially known. The United States government has a long history of developing top-secret military projects in remote locations like Area 51 and Tonopah Test Range, both in Nevada, not far from Arizona. Advanced aircraft and drone models are often tested for decades before being officially acknowledged. Could that object have been one of these prototypes? There is an intriguing detail. Some witnesses reported that, in addition to the main lights, there were small red and blue blinking lights at specific points on the structure, similar to the navigation lights used on military aircraft. But if it was a secret plane, how did it manage to move without making any sound? Even stealth aircraft like the F-117 Nighthawk and B-2 Spirit produce some level of noise, and neither of them matches the shape or size described by the witnesses. Another possibility raised by conspiracy theorists is that the object could have been an experimental military airship. Some research indicates that the United States has developed massive aircraft using silent propulsion systems, employing magnetic or plasma-based technology to reduce noise. However, there is no official confirmation that anything like this was operational in 1997. Moreover, an airship would have to deal with wind currents, yet reports indicate that the object moved in a controlled manner, without visible oscillations. But if it wasn't a conventional aircraft or an airship, then what was it? Some information suggests that Luke Air Force Base may have played a bigger role in the incident than publicly known. Reports indicate that shortly after the first lights appeared, 2 F-15 fighter jets were deployed to the area. Some witnesses claim to have seen the jets taking off urgently, flying at high speed toward the phenomenon. But what happened next? No official report mentions this supposed interception. Did the pilots encounter something they could not disclose? Another military base that may have been involved is the Yuma Proving Ground, one of the largest military testing facilities in the United States, located in Arizona. This base is known for its drone, missile, and experimental vehicle testing. Could the Phoenix event be related to a secret test conducted from this facility? If so, why didn't any authorities simply confirm this and put an end to the speculation? One curious aspect of this case is that experimental technology is typically tested in remote locations, far from urban areas. So why would an object of this size fly over a city like Phoenix, where thousands of people could see it? Was it out of control? Or perhaps was it not a human project? The U.S. military has a history of incidents in which unidentified aircraft were pursued by fighter pilots without success. In 2004, for example, the famous Tic Tac UFO case, involving Navy pilots, revealed that an unknown object demonstrated flight capabilities impossible for any terrestrial technology. Could it be that the Phoenix lights were a similar event, but years earlier? If what was seen that night was terrestrial technology, why didn't the military simply admit it? And if it wasn't, then what exactly crossed Arizona's skies on March 13, 1997? When an event of this magnitude occurs, the first people the public expects to hear from are the authorities. But what if the authorities themselves saw something they couldn't explain? The Phoenix Lights case became even more enigmatic when, years later, former Arizona Governor Fife Symington confessed that he too had witnessed the phenomenon that night, and that it was not from this world. At the time, the public reaction to the event was intense. With thousands of reports emerging and the media pressing for answers, Symington held a press conference. But instead of providing any concrete explanation, he treated the case as a joke. During the live broadcast, he brought out one of his aides dressed as an alien, claiming they had finally found the culprit for the commotion. The audience laughed. The media treated the case as resolved. And for a while, the official narrative was set. There was nothing extraordinary about that night. But something didn't add up. If there was nothing unusual, why did Symington feel the need to ridicule the event? Why would a public figure, with access to confidential information, spend time and effort orchestrating a spectacle to divert attention from what thousands of people claim to have seen? Was it a calculated maneuver to calm the public? The silence lasted almost a decade until, in 2007, Fife Symington finally revealed the truth. In an interview with CNN, the former governor admitted that he had also seen the object that night, and that it was not of human origin. It was enormous. It had a distinct shape, a massive boomerang, and it hovered silently over the city. I've never seen anything like it. As a pilot and former Air Force member, I can say for certain, it was not our technology, it was not a conventional military aircraft. This radical shift in his story took everyone by surprise. Why hide this for so long? What made him change his mind and speak publicly after so many years? According to Symington, the reason for his initial joke was simple. He was pressured to calm the population. With the event gaining alarming proportions, authorities wanted to prevent panic and ensure that the incident did not become a public safety threat. But this justification raises an even bigger question. If there was nothing abnormal that night, why were authorities so worried? After his confession, Symington began supporting investigations into the case. He argued that the government should be more transparent about unidentified aerial phenomena, and even criticized the official explanation given by the military. To him, The military's flare theory was just a convenient excuse to cover up something much bigger. The explanation doesn't match what I saw. The lights were fixed to a solid, giant object, and it moved in a controlled manner. I will never forget that sight. What's most intriguing about this testimony is that it didn't come from a conspiracy theorist or an ordinary citizen. It came from a former governor, a man trained to handle political and military matters. His change of stance reinforced the idea that the Phoenix Lights were, in fact, a real event, and that something was deliberately hidden from the public. But the big question remains: what did Fife Symington see that night? And why did so many other authorities and military personnel remain silent? If the state's own governor stated that the object was not terrestrial, what else could be hidden behind this mystery? Years have passed since that night on March 13, 1997, but the questions remain. If the official explanation were truly accurate, why does the Phoenix Lights case still generate so much debate? Why do so many witnesses, including authorities, openly disagree with the military's version? What makes this case so fascinating is that there has never been an answer that closes all the gaps in the story. If it was just a military exercise, then where are the detailed flight records from that night? If they were just flares, why did so many people describe a solid, massive object crossing the sky? And if it was experimental technology, why test it openly over a major city? One of the most intriguing theories suggests that the Phoenix event was not an isolated incident. Reports of similar sightings with V-shaped light formations or enormous, silent objects have surfaced in other parts of the world over the decades. In 1990, for example, Belgium experienced a wave of triangular object sightings that were pursued unsuccessfully by Belgian Air Force jets. The pilots reported that the objects were capable of maneuvers impossible for any known aircraft. Was it the same type of phenomenon? Another curious detail is that phenomena similar to the Phoenix Lights have been described in declassified military documents over the years. Pentagon archives contain records of objects spotted by U.S. Navy pilots exhibiting the same anomalous behavior: silent, massive, moving against the wind, and disappearing without a trace. If something of this scale truly flew over Arizona that night, what explains the silence from authorities? Could it be that governments around the world know more than they admit? In recent years, the U.S. Department of Defense has acknowledged that unidentified aerial phenomena are being studied. The videos released by the Pentagon, showing unknown objects being pursued by Navy pilots, reinforce the idea that something beyond conventional understanding is happening in the skies. But if these events remain a mystery even to the military, what does that mean? The truth about the Phoenix Lights remains shrouded in doubts and contradictions. If the official explanation doesn't hold up, then what really happened that night? Was it a military experiment, a secret technology, or something beyond human comprehension? Whatever the answer may be, one thing is certain: the mystery of the Phoenix Lights is far from solved. What happened in the Arizona skies on the night of March 13, 1997, remains one of the greatest mysteries in modern ufology. Thousands of witnesses, including pilots, police officers, and even a governor, described something impossible to ignore: a colossal, silent, and unknown object. But instead of answers, what followed was a game of misinformation, inconsistent explanations, and a silence that only deepened the doubts. If the Phoenix Lights were just military flares, why do witness descriptions contradict that version? If it was experimental technology, why have authorities never admitted it? And if it wasn't ours, then what really crossed the skies that night? This story is just one piece, and one day, perhaps you'll see the whole puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share. After all, more voices mean more discoveries.